I believed I was just a desperate temp server scraping together cash for my daughter on December 23rd, while my husband, Julian, attended a grim business seminar to salvage our financial ruin. But when Marco, an elderly waiter, violently shoved me behind a heavy velvet curtain, I witnessed a cruel reality. Julian was not bankrupt. This opulent gala was actually celebrating the secret empire he had constructed entirely upon the sacrifices my daughter and I had made. My name is Elena Vance, and at 34 years old, I felt less like the promising interior architect I used to be, and more like a machine built solely for debt repayment. My hands, once stained with graphite and drafting ink, were now rough from the harsh chemicals I used in my second job as a cleaner. I checked my reflection in the fogged mirror of the employee locker room, trying to tuck a stray lock of hair back into my tight bun. The woman staring back at me looked hollowed out, a ghost of the person who used to host dinner parties before the financial avalanche buried us. My husband, Julian, had spent the last 2 years dragging us through the slow, agonizing death of his tech startup. We had sold our beautiful craftsman bungalow to pay off his initial investors and moved into a rental apartment where the heating pipes groaned like dying animals and the draft from the windows chilled my 5-year-old daughter, Lily, to the bone. Julian was always apologetic, always tragic. The market is crashing. He had whispered just 2 days ago, his head in his hands. I don't know how we're going to survive January. Then came the trip. He told me he had to go to a business relief seminar in New York over Christmas. It was a last-ditch effort to network with potential saviors for his company. I can't leave you any cash. Honey, Julian had said, his voice trembling as he packed his worn-out duffel bag. I'm barely scraping together enough for the bus ticket myself. Please, just hold on until I get back. So, while he was supposedly shivering in a cheap motel in Queens, I was here, taking a high-paying temp shift at the Sterling, one of the most ostentatious skyscrapers in Chicago. The agency offered $500 for a single night of work on December 23rd. It was a miracle. It was the only way Lily was going to get a present under our tiny plastic tree. Getting here had been a battle. I dropped Lily off at my mother's house, kissing her warm forehead while guilt twisted in my gut. Then I stood at the bus stop for 40 minutes in a blinding snowstorm, the Chicago wind cutting right through my thin winter coat. My feet were already aching in the stiff black service shoes by the time I punched in at the service entrance. However, nothing could have prepared me for the assault on the senses that was the grand ballroom. When I pushed through the swinging doors with a heavy tray of crystal flutes, the sheer opulence nearly knocked the wind out of me. The room smelled of expensive perfume and truffle oil. There were towers of chilled seafood, mounds of glistening black caviar, and a champagne fountain that likely cost more than my entire college tuition. The guests were draped in velvet and silk, their wrists and necks flashing with diamonds that caught the light of the massive chandeliers above. I kept my head down, navigating the sea of tuxedos and gowns. I felt small and dirty, a smudge on their perfect picture. Every time I offered a glass, I shrank back, terrified that someone from my old life might recognize Elena Vance, the architect, in this servant's uniform. As I wove through the laughing crowd, a pang of sorrow for Julian hit me hard. Here I was, surrounded by warmth and millions of dollars in wasted food, while my poor husband was probably eating a cold sandwich from a vending machine, stressing over our ruin. He's doing this for us, I whispered to myself, gripping the tray tighter. Just get through the night. Suddenly, the floor manager, a sharp-faced man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, grabbed my elbow. "You there?" he hissed, pointing toward the raised platform at the far end of the hall. "We need more champagne in the VIP section behind the velvet ropes. The host is about to make his entrance speech. Go!" Now I nodded quickly and turned toward the stage, completely unaware that I was walking straight into a collision that would shatter my reality forever. I tightened my grip on the silver tray. the delicate stems of the crystal flutes clicking softly against one another as I navigated the perimeter of the VIP section. The room began to dim, and a hush of anticipation swept through the ballroom like a cold draft. All eyes turned toward the main stage, where a single, blinding spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the microphone stand. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach, though I told myself it was just the pressure of the job. I needed to deliver this champagne and retreat to the shadows before the speeches began. I was only 20 feet from the stage-left entrance when a figure detached itself from the gloom near a marble pillar. It was an older waiter, his silver hair neatly combed back, holding a linen napkin with practiced elegance. I froze. I knew that posture. It was Marco, the head waiter from Le Jardin, the Italian restaurant Julian and I used to frequent every Friday night before our lives collapsed. He had served us for years, witnessing our anniversaries and birthdays back when we could afford $300 dinners. Marco squinted at me, his eyes widening in disbelief as he took in my uniform and the tired lines on my face. He abandoned his post and rushed toward me, his face draining of all color. "Mrs. Vance?" he gasped, his voice a hoarse whisper that barely carried over the low hum of the crowd. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. Oh my God. "What are you doing here?" I opened my mouth to explain, to offer a humiliating excuse about the temp agency and the bills. But Marco did not let me speak. He looked frantically toward the closed double doors of the stage entrance and then back at me, terror etched into his deep wrinkles. "You have to go," he hissed, his hands trembling as he reached out to block my path. "Mrs. Vance, please, hide quickly. Do not let him see you if he sees you here." "Marco, I don't understand," I stammered, confusion clouding my mind. "I'm just working. I need the mon." My words were cut off by a thunderous orchestral swell that shook the floorboards. The lights flickered and surged, signaling the arrival of the guest of honor. Marco did not hesitate. With a strength surprising for his age, he grabbed my shoulders and shoved me violently backward, pushing me into the narrow alcove behind the heavy floor-to-ceiling velvet drapes that separated the service area from the main floor. "Stay back," Marco warned, his voice cracking with urgency. "For the love of God, stay hidden." I stumbled against the wall, clutching the heavy tray to my chest to keep the glasses from shattering and exposing me. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wanted to run, but my feet felt leaden. Curiosity, fatal and sharp, forced me to lean forward. I peered through a small gap between the thick crimson folds of the fabric. The massive double doors swung open. I expected a stranger. I expected some tech mogul or an ancient banking heir. Instead, I saw a man stride out into the light with the grace of a jungle cat. He was wearing a tuxedo that I knew instantly was bespoke, the black fabric absorbing the light, tailored perfectly to broad shoulders that were currently supposed to be slumped in defeat at a cheap motel in Queens. He adjusted his silk cuffs with a flick of his wrist, his chin held high, a smile of supreme arrogance playing on his lips. The air left my lungs in a silent scream. It was Julian, my husband, the man who had wept in our kitchen 3 days ago because he could not afford a new pair of winter boots, the man who had kissed me goodbye with chapped lips, swearing he would starve himself in New York just to save a few dollars for our debts. He looked radiant. He looked powerful. He looked rich. A booming voice filled the auditorium, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the man of the hour, the visionary CEO of Aura Tech, who has just successfully closed a $500 million merger, Mr. Julian Vance." The applause was deafening, a tidal wave of adoration that washed over him. I stood frozen in the dark, the tray of champagne tilting dangerously in my numb hands. $500 million. The number rang in my ears, mocking the 2 years of poverty. the tears, and the hunger I had endured. It was not a failure. It was not a bankruptcy. It was a masquerade. And I was the fool watching from behind the curtain. The spotlight caught the glint of platinum on Julian's left wrist as he raised a crystal flute to the cheering crowd. My breath hitched in my throat, turning into a shard of ice that pierced my lungs. It was his Patek Philippe Nautilus. I remembered the night he came home weeping, telling me he had pawned it at a fraction of its value just to pay our overdue rent and keep the eviction notice off our door. I had held him while he sobbed into my shoulder, telling him he was brave, that material things did not matter, but he had never sold it. He had kept it, likely stored in a velvet box in some secret apartment while I sold my grandmother's wedding ring to buy groceries. The applause shifted as a woman glided onto the stage. She was stunning, a vision in emerald silk that clung to her silhouette like a second skin. I recognized her instantly from the society pages I used to read. Bianca, the 28-year-old daughter of a banking tycoon. She did not look like a colleague. She looked like a queen claiming her throne. She moved to Julian's side with a familiarity that made my stomach churn, her hand resting possessively on his forearm. And none of this would be possible, Julian announced, his voice smooth and dripping with false humility, without my partner in crime, my vice president, and the woman who helped me build this empire from the ashes, Bianca. The room erupted again, but the applause covered a wave of hushed whispers near my hiding spot. Two women in shimmering gowns were standing just on the other side of the velvet curtain, oblivious to the servant trembling inches away from them. "They look perfect together," one whispered. "I heard he's finally going to propose on New Year's Eve." Just as soon as the lawyers finalized the divorce with that leech of a wife, the one who spent all his seed money, the other replied with a scoff. "Good riddance. A man like Julian needs an equal, not a gold digger who drags him down." The words hit me like physical blows. A gold digger. The irony tasted like bile. I thought of the last 2 years. I thought of the nights I skipped dinner, drinking only water so there would be enough chicken for Julian and Lily. I thought of the bank interest payments he demanded every month, the ones that drained my cleaning wages dry. I had been starving myself to fund his dates with Bianca. I had been scrubbing toilets to pay for the champagne they were drinking right now. Julian cleared his throat, commanding silence. "Success requires sacrifice," he said, his gaze sweeping over the room, looking right through the curtain where I stood. "To reach the summit, one must be willing to cut the rope. I had to eliminate the unnecessary burdens that were anchoring me to the bottom. Only then could I fly." He was talking about me. He was talking about his own daughter. We were the unnecessary burdens. My knees gave way. The heavy silver tray slipped from my numb fingers, tilting dangerously toward the floor. I waited for the crash, the sound that would expose me to the room and end my life. But it never came. Marco was there. With the reflexes of a man who had spent 40 years in service, he caught the tray inches before it hit the ground. He stabilized the glasses, not a single drop spilling, and looked at me with eyes full of sorrow and intense warning. "Steady," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Do not give him the satisfaction. "Mrs. Vance, breathe." I looked at Marco, then back at the slice of light between the curtains. I saw Julian laughing at something Bianca whispered in his ear. If I ran out there now, screaming and crying, I would be the crazy ex-wife. I would be the hysterical server ruining a $500 million celebration. Security would drag me out. Julian would spin the story. He would destroy me, and he would take Lily away because I would look unstable. The tears that had been welling in my eyes suddenly evaporated. The crushing weight in my chest vanished, replaced by a cold, hollow void. I stood up straight, smoothing the front of my cheap uniform. I did not feel sad anymore. I felt surgical. "Thank you, Marco," I whispered, my voice flat and devoid of tremors. I turned my back on the light, on the applause, and on the husband who had murdered the woman I used to be. I walked silently toward the service exit, moving through the shadows like a phantom. I left the tears for the week. I had something much more effective to bring home to my daughter tonight. I had the truth. The silence of the apartment was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic, soft breathing of my daughter. I stood over Lily's bed, watching her clutch a worn-out teddy bear that had lost an eye years ago. The radiator clanked, a reminder of the poverty we lived in, but for the first time in 2 years, the sound did not make me despair. It made me furious. I reached down and smoothed the hair from her forehead, my hand steady. I was done crying. Tears were for victims, and as of tonight, I was no longer a victim. I was a hunter. I walked into the kitchen and pulled a battered shoebox from the top shelf of the pantry. Inside were the papers Julian had wept over just last week, the bankruptcy filings, the debt consolidation forms, and the most damning document of all, the divorce agreement. It's just on paper. He had sobbed, gripping my hands until they hurt. "We have to divorce legally so the creditors can't take your future earnings. I can't drag you down with me. I had signed them, blinded by pity and love, but I had not mailed them yet. I was waiting for a stamp. That missing stamp was the only thing that had saved me from total annihilation." I grabbed my phone and scrolled past the contacts of friends who had abandoned us when the money ran out, stopping at a name I had not dialed in 3 years. David. He was a forensic accountant, brilliant and ruthless, the kind of man who saw numbers as blood trails. Julian had forced me to cut ties with him, claiming David was jealous of our success, but now I knew the truth. Julian had been terrified of him. It was 3 a.m, but David answered on the second ring. "Elena." His voice was thick with sleep, but instantly alert. "Is everything okay?" "No." "David," I said, my voice cold and clear. "I need you. I have files. I have account numbers. And I need to know where the money went." We met at 6 a.m. on December 24th at his home office. David looked older, but his eyes were just as sharp behind his wire-rimmed glasses. I handed him the stack of financial statements Julian had given me, the ones showing zeros, negative balances, and looming foreclosure threats. "He tells me these are the only accounts," I said, sipping the black coffee David had placed in front of me. "He says the business accounts are frozen by the IRS. David didn't speak. He just started typing. His fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the clicking sound filling the room like gunfire. He pulled up the metadata from the digital statements I had forwarded to him, bypasses the surface-level encryption, and began to dig. For 20 minutes, the only sound was the hum of his hard drives. Then, he stopped. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Helena, come look at this." I walked around the desk. The screen was a web of transactions, lines of red and green crossing borders I had never even visited. "The bankruptcy is a shell game," David explained, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. "He didn't lose the seed money. He funneled it through a holding company in the Cayman Islands called JV Ventures. And look at the payout schedule. Every time he told you he couldn't pay the rent, a transfer was made to this account here. My eyes followed his finger to a withdrawal made 3 months ago. The amount was $200,000. "That was the sale of our house," I whispered, nausea rising in my throat. He told me the bank took it all for interest. He bought a property. "Elena," David said softly, clicking on a deed document, a lakeside villa in Lake Geneva. "Wisconsin. It was purchased in cash under the corporate name Bianca Holdings, LLC. Bianca. The name was a physical blow. He had used the money from our family home, the home where Lily took her first steps, to buy a love nest for his mistress. He is liquidating everything. Elena, David warned, turning his chair to face me. The pattern here is clear. He is cashing out. Once you file those divorce papers and accept the debt, he disappears. He is planning to vanish with the assets, leaving you with the liabilities. If you had mailed that envelope, you would be destitute by January. My phone buzzed on the desk, vibrating against the mahogany wood. I looked down. It was a text from Julian. I am so sorry, honey. The seminar is running late and I don't have enough for the bus ticket home yet. I might be stuck here for Christmas. Kiss Lily for me. I love you both so much. I stared at the screen. I could picture him lying in the 400 thread count sheets of the hotel suite at the Sterling, probably ordering room service with Bianca while he typed these lies. David looked at me, concerned. What are you going to do? I picked up the phone. I did not shake. I did not cry. I typed a response with calm, deliberate fingers. It is okay. My love, I understand completely. Don't worry about the money. Just come home when you can. I have a surprise waiting for you that will change everything. I hit send. I am going to welcome him home. I told David, a dark smile touching my lips. And then I am going to bury him. The afternoon of December 24th brought a gray, oppressive sky, and with it, my husband returned. Julian did not come home to hold his daughter or comfort his wife. He came to sever the limbs so he could save the body. He looked catastrophic. His hair was disheveled, his eyes were red-rimmed, and he wore a stained gray hoodie that smelled of stale bus exhaust and cheap tobacco. It was a masterpiece of performance art. I stood in the doorway, wiping my hands on a kitchen rag, and watched him limp into our narrow hallway. I walked the last 10 blocks, Julian rasped, collapsing onto our sagging beige sofa. I couldn't afford a cab from the station. My feet are killing me. I rushed to him, my face a mask of terrified concern. Oh, Julian. You poor thing, let me get you some water. I went to the kitchen, my hands shaking not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the hunt. I knew for a fact he had taken a private town car from the airport and had likely changed into these rags in a gas station bathroom 2 streets away. I heated up a can of vegetable soup 99 cents at the discount store and served it to him. I watched him force down the watery broth, feigning hunger, knowing his stomach was likely still digesting the A5 Wagyu beef he had enjoyed at the banquet less than 24 hours ago. I can't stay long, he said, pushing the bowl away after only 3 spoonfuls. He reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a crisp, white envelope. The divorce papers. We need to do this now. Elena, the creditors. They are circling. If we don't separate our assets by tomorrow, they will come for you. They will take Lily's college fund. I can't let that happen. He placed a black pen in my hand. His palm was sweaty. His eyes were not sad. They were darting, impatient, and greedy. He looked at the clock on the wall, tapping his foot. Sign it, he urged, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. Just sign right there on the line. Baby, do it for Lily. Please. I am begging you to let me save you. I held the pen, letting it hover over the signature line. I made my hand tremble violently. I looked up at him, widening my eyes to look like a frightened deer caught in headlights. I don't know. Julian, I stammered, letting a tear leak out. It feels so final. Can't we just wait until— No, he snapped, then quickly softened his tone, realizing his mistake. No time. Trust me. This is the only way. I reached for my mug of hot coffee, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. As I brought the cup toward my lips, I allowed my wrist to spasm. The dark, steaming liquid splashed violently across the table, soaking the documents in a muddy brown tide. The ink ran instantly, turning the legal text into a blurred mess. Oh my God, I cried out, jumping up. I am so clumsy, Julian. I am so sorry. Julian stared at the sodden papers, his jaw tightening until a vein popped in his forehead. For a second, the mask slipped, and I saw pure, unadulterated rage. Then, he took a deep breath and forced a pained, tight smile. It's okay, he said through gritted teeth. Accidents happen. I will have to go to the copy center tomorrow morning and print a new set. I'll clean this up, I said, wiping the table frantically. Go take a shower. Honey, you smell like the road. Relax for a moment. As soon as the bathroom door clicked shut and the water pipes began to groan, I moved. I knew he had a second phone. He usually kept it locked in his office safe. But today, in his arrogance and haste, he had left it in the pocket of his discarded hoodie. I fished it out. It was a sleek, brand-new model. Months ago, one night when he had passed out from exhaustion, which I now knew was just too much wine, I had pressed my own thumb against the scanner in the settings menu, adding myself as a trusted user just in case. I had never needed it until now. I pressed my thumb to the screen. It unlocked instantly. My heart raced as I opened his messaging app. The thread at the top was pinned under the name Bianca. She had texted 10 minutes ago. Did the bitch sign it yet? Julian had replied. Working on it. She is clueless. I will be free by tomorrow morning. I scrolled up, my eyes scanning faster than they ever had before. There were photos of them on a yacht, screenshots of bank transfers totaling over $2 million to a Swiss account. And then, the final nail in the coffin. A confirmation email from the airline. Flight LX-119 to Zurich. Departure December 25, 9:00 p.m. Passengers. Mr. Julian Vance, Ms. Bianca Sterling, ticket. Type one way. He was not just leaving me. He was fleeing the country. He was going to leave me and Lily with nothing but debt and a frozen apartment while he skied in the Alps with his mistress. Elena Julian's voice called out from the bathroom. Do we have any fresh towels? Coming, darling, I called back. My voice sweet and steady. I quickly photographed the screen with my own phone, ensuring every damning detail was legible. I wiped his phone screen on my shirt to remove my prints and slid it back into his hoodie pocket exactly as I had found it. I am coming, I whispered to the empty room. And so is your judgment day. I did not sleep a wink on Christmas Eve. While Julian snored in the bedroom, oblivious to the sword hanging over his neck, I sat on the cold bathroom floor with my laptop. I uploaded every screenshot, every bank statement, and every degrading text message to Sarah Blackwood. Sarah was not just a lawyer, she was a predator in a power suit, famous in Chicago for leaving unfaithful billionaires with nothing but their bus fare. By 3 a.m, Sarah had replied. She had already drafted an emergency asset freeze motion and a formal complaint for financial fraud, but it was David who found the smoking gun. Elena, listen to me carefully, David whispered over the phone, his voice buzzing with adrenaline. I found a dormant joint account from your early days. It is the only one he couldn't drain without a dual digital authorization. There is nearly $200,000 in there. He needs your digital signature to release it to his offshore shell company. That is why he came back. He needs you to sign into the banking portal by noon on December 25th, or the transfer window closes. So that was it. He wasn't just here for the divorce papers. He was here to pick the carcass clean. I formulated a plan that was as festive as it was vicious. At 6 a.m, while the sun was still struggling to rise, I sent a text to Julian's parents, inviting them over for an urgent Christmas brunch. I knew they would come. They loved appearances, even if they currently hated me. When Julian stumbled out of the bedroom at 9 a.m, rubbing his eyes and expecting a quiet submission, he froze. His parents were sitting on our mismatched folding chairs, sipping tea. Mom, Dad, Julian stammered, his face twitching with a mix of confusion and irritation. What? What are you doing here? He shot a glare at me, his eyes screaming murder. He had spent 2 years telling them that I was a shopaholic who had driven his company into the ground. Having them here complicated his narrative of the suffering martyr. Elena invited us, his mother, Beatrice, sniffed, looking around our cramped apartment with undisguised disgust. She adjusted her pearls and looked at me with cold, judging eyes. Though I must say, seeing how you are living, it breaks my heart. My poor son works himself to the bone, and you still haven't learned to manage a household budget. Have you? She reached out and patted Julian's hand. Don't worry, darling. Once you are free of these burdens, you can start over. Julian forced a smile, but sweat was already beading on his upper lip. Mom, please. Elena and I have some paperwork to finish. Maybe you guys should nonsense, I interrupted, walking into the room with a tray of cookies. I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. We can do the paperwork later. Honey, it is Christmas. We should celebrate together. Beatrice let out a sharp sigh. Celebrate with what money, Elena? You have bled him dry. I met her gaze, my expression serene. Actually, Beatrice, I think you are right. The truth about where the money went is very important. In fact, today everything will become crystal clear. I walked over to the small plastic tree in the corner. Underneath it sat a single heavy package. It was a thick dossier of evidence, wrapped meticulously in bright red paper with a shimmering gold bow. It looked festive, but inside lay the destruction of Julian's entire life. While they awkwardly sipped their tea, I excused myself to the kitchen one last time. I pulled my burner phone from the flour jar where I had hidden it. I dialed the number David had given me. It was the direct line to the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. Agent Miller, a gruff voice, answered. My name is Elena Vance, I said, my voice steady and low. I have evidence of high-level tax evasion, money laundering through shell companies, and wire fraud involving the CEO of Aura Tech. He is at my apartment right now, attempting to flee to Switzerland tonight. I hung up and smoothed my apron. The trap was set. It was time to open presents. Come on, Elena, Julian hissed, tapping his fingernails against the cheap laminate of our kitchen table. He pushed the reprinted divorce papers toward me, his leg bouncing with a nervous energy that shook the floorboards. We don't have time for games. Sign the papers so I can get back to fixing this mess for us. I sat across from him, my hands folded calmly in my lap. The room smelled of pine needles and the cinnamon tea I had brewed for his parents, who sat on the sofa like a pair of grim gargoyles. I will sign. Julian, I said, my voice sweet like poisoned honey. But it is Christmas morning. We can't just talk about legal matters without exchanging gifts first. Julian rolled his eyes, a gesture of pure contempt. We couldn't afford gifts. Remember? We are destitute. I know, I replied, reaching under the tree and pulling out the heavy red package, but I managed to scrape something together. Please, open it. It is exactly what you deserve. Julian sighed, snatching the box from my hands with aggressive impatience. Beatrice let out a loud huff from the couch. Really, Elena, she muttered, spending money on wrapping paper when my son is drowning in debt. This is exactly why her voice died in her throat as Julian tore off the paper. The lid of the box fell to the floor. He did not pull out a sweater or a watch. He pulled out a stack of high-resolution 8x10 glossy photographs. The first photo was a close-up of him standing on the stage at the Sterling less than 12 hours ago, holding a glass of vintage champagne. The second was him laughing, his head thrown back in arrogance. The third was a crystal-clear shot of him kissing Bianca in the VIP booth, his hand resting possessively on her hip. And the last item was not a photo, but a printed bank statement from a private bank in Zurich, highlighting a balance of $4 million. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. I watched with immense satisfaction as the color drained from Julian's face. He went from a healthy flush to the pallor of a corpse in seconds. Then, a violent shade of crimson rushed up his neck. His hands began to shake so hard the photographs rattled. "What?" Julian croaked, his voice failing him. "Where did you—" Beatrice and his father. Robert leaned forward, squinting at the pictures in his hands. "Is that—" Robert started, adjusting his spectacles. "Is that you?" "Son." Last night I stood up and walked over to the table, pointing a finger at the first photo. "Allow me to explain," I said, looking directly at Beatrice. "You see this man. This is your son, Julian. The man who texted me yesterday saying he did not have $40 for a bus ticket. Yet, here he is wearing a tuxedo that cost $3,000 and a Patek Philippe watch worth $50,000. Quite a fashion statement for a bankrupt man. Don't you think Julian shoved the photos away as if they burned his skin?" He jumped up, knocking his chair over. "This is fake," he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. She photoshopped these. She is crazy. Mom." The stress has finally snapped her mind. I was in a motel in Queens, and the bank statement I asked. My voice deadly calm. "Is the account number ending in 4590 also a hallucination? Because I'm pretty sure that's where the money from our house sale went." "Liar," Julian roared, sweat pouring down his temples. "You are a liar. I didn't argue." I simply picked up my phone and pressed play on the audio file I had queued up. Julian's voice, clear and unmistakable, filled the small apartment. "I can't wait to be done with her. Bianca. She is such a burden. Once I get the stupid cow to sign the papers, we are free. I'm going to kick her and the kid to the curb and we'll be in Zurich by Christmas night. Then," Bianca's laugh, tinkling and cruel, "make sure she takes the debt, baby. I don't want her coming after your money." "Don't worry," Julian's recorded voice replied. "She is too naive to fight back." I stopped the recording. Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Robert looked at his son with a mixture of horror and profound shame. They were proud people, strict about honor and reputation. Their son wasn't just a failure. He was a monster. Julie Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling. "Tell me that isn't you." Julian looked around the room, realizing the walls were closing in. The act was over. The slumped shoulders of the defeated husband vanished, replaced by the sneering, arrogant posture I had seen on the stage. He bared his teeth at me. So what he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You think a few pictures change anything? You have nothing that money is in offshore corporate accounts? It belongs to Aura Tech, not to you. You can't touch a dime of it. You stupid, pathetic woman. You are going to sign those papers, or I will drag this out in court until you starve." "Oh, Julian," I said, shaking my head slowly. "I don't need to touch the money. I just needed to make sure you couldn't either." Julian lunged across the small kitchen table, his face twisted into a mask of pure animalistic panic. He clawed at the photographs and the bank statements, desperate to destroy the physical proof of his double life. "Give those to me," he screamed, his voice cracking. "You have no right to." The front door of our apartment did not just open. It exploded inward. Sarah Blackwood strode into the room, her heels clicking sharply against the cheap linoleum floor like gunfire. She was followed closely by David and two uniformed police officers. Sarah looked immaculate in a charcoal power suit, holding a leather briefcase like a shield. She stepped between me and Julian, her expression made of granite. "Step away from my client." "Mr. Vance," Sarah commanded, her voice low but echoing with authority. "And step away from the evidence." Julian froze, his hand suspended in mid-air. He looked from Sarah to the police officers, his eyes darting wildly. Who are you?" he stammered, backing up until he hit the refrigerator. "This is a private residence. Get out." "I am Sarah Blackwood," she replied, tossing a heavy stack of documents onto the table beside the spilled coffee. "And this is a court order signed by Judge Holloway at 5 o'clock this morning. It is an emergency freezing injunction against all assets held by you, Auratech, and any associated shell entities, including the account in Zurich you thought was secure." Julian turned pale. You can't do that. That's corporate property. It is marital property until proven otherwise, Sarah countered, her tone razor-sharp. Furthermore, the merger with the unsuspecting partners at Auratech has been suspended. My office sent over the forensic accounting report regarding your money laundering activities an hour ago. The deal is dead. Julian. The silence that followed was broken only by the buzzing of the phone in Julian's pocket. It vibrated against the table where he had left it. He looked down instinctively. The screen lit up with a message preview from Bianca. "You idiot! You are exposed. It is all over the news leaks. Don't contact me again. I am on the first flight out." I watched the hope die in his eyes. He had lost the money. He had lost the merger. And now, the woman he had destroyed our family for was abandoning him without a second thought. One of the officers stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. "Mr. Vance, we need you to come with us for questioning regarding allegations of wire fraud and embezzlement." Julian looked at his parents. Beatrice was weeping silently into her handkerchief, unable to even look at him. Robert stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped in shame. Julian looked back at me, his arrogance completely evaporated. He looked small. "Elena," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Elena, tell them this is a mistake." I walked past Sarah and stood directly in front of him. I pulled a new document from my apron pocket. It was the revised divorce settlement Sarah and I had drafted overnight. "I won't tell them anything, Julian," I said, my voice steady, "unless you sign this." He looked at the paper, his eyes losing focus. "What? What is this?" "It is a new agreement," I explained cold and fast. "You concede full physical and legal custody of Lily to me. You agree to transfer 80% of all recovered assets, including the offshore accounts, to me as restitution for financial abuse. If you sign this now, I will refrain from handing over the supplementary evidence about the tax evasion schemes you set up for your investors. The police have enough to put you away for fraud, but that extra evidence would bury you for 20 years. Julian looked at the pen I held out. His hands shook so violently he could barely grasp it. He realized he was trapped. He had no leverage. He had no allies. 80% he choked out, tears streaming down his face. "Elena, please, that leaves me with nothing. I'll be ruined." "You were ruined the moment you decided to betray us," I replied, unmoving. He scribbled his signature, the lines jagged and weak. Then he looked up at me, dropping to his knees on the dirty kitchen floor. He grabbed the hem of my jeans, sobbing like a child. "Elle, please, I'm sorry," he blubbered, snot running down his nose. "I was lost. I made a mistake. But I am still your husband. We have 12 years together. Doesn't that mean anything? Please, don't let them take me. I love you." I looked down at the man kneeling at my feet. I searched for any spark of affection, any lingering warmth for the man I had married. I found nothing but ice. I pulled my leg away from his grasp and looked him dead in the eye. "You must be confused," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "The husband I loved died in a cheap motel in New York yesterday, just like you said. You are just the stranger who stole his name." I turned to the officers and nodded. "Take him away." The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut around Julian's wrists echoed through the hallway like a gunshot, signaling the end of his charade. 2 officers gripped his arms, marching him out of the apartment he had once deemed too pathetic for his stature. I stood in the doorway, watching as our nosy neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, peeked out from her unit down the hall, her eyes widening at the sight of the disgraced CEO being hauled away. Julian tried to keep his head down, but the shame was a physical weight, bowing his spine. "Mom, Dad, do something," Julian whined, his voice cracking as he looked back at his parents. "Call the lawyer. Please." Beatrice and Robert stood frozen in our living room, their faces pale masks of humiliation. They did not move to help him. They did not even speak. They simply watched their son, the golden boy who had promised them a legacy, disappear into the back of a squad car. By 2 in the afternoon, the story had broken across every major news network. The headline, "CEO of Aura Tech arrested for massive fraud scheme," flashed across the television screen I had left on in the background. The stock market reacted instantly and violently. Aura Tech shares plummeted by 60% in a single hour, wiping out the paper fortune Julian had bragged about on stage just the night before. The justice did not stop with Julian. An hour later, a breaking news alert popped up on my phone. Bianca had been intercepted by federal agents at O'Hare International Airport while attempting to board a first-class flight to Zurich. She had been trying to smuggle $300,000 worth of loose diamonds inside a hollowed-out hairdryer in her carry-on luggage. The diamonds, it turned out, were purchased with funds embezzled from the company accounts. I sat at the kitchen table with David, sifting through the wreckage of the financial documents. The apartment was quiet now, peaceful in a way it had not been for years. "Look at this." "Elena," David said, pointing to a complex trust structure hidden deep within the offshore paperwork. He set up a trust fund called the Lily Vance Education Initiative. He intended to use it as a tax-free slush fund for himself, a place to hide assets where the IRS wouldn't look too closely because it was technically for a child. I looked at the balance. There was over $1 million sitting in that account. "The irony," David continued, a satisfied grin spreading across his face, "is that by naming it that way and finalizing the paperwork to make it look legitimate, he legally made Lily the sole beneficiary. He can't touch it. It belongs entirely to her now." I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest. Julian had accidentally secured our daughter's future while trying to steal it. In the living room, Beatrice and Robert gathered their coats. They moved quietly, like ghosts terrified of haunting their own house. Beatrice paused at the door, her hand hovering over the knob. She looked at me, her eyes red and swollen, stripped of all their usual haughtiness. We didn't know." "Elena," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I swear." "We thought he was telling the truth about you." "I know," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "But you chose to believe the worst of me without ever asking. Goodbye, Beatrice." They slipped out the door, retreating into a world where they would now have to explain to their country club friends why their son was a felon. With the parents gone and the police work finished, I picked up the pen and signed the final divorce decree. It was a unilateral filing, citing criminal misconduct and financial abandonment. The terms were absolute. I took everything. 3 weeks later, the settlement funds were released. The first thing I did was call the bank that held the foreclosure title on our old Craftsman bungalow. I bought it back in cash. Walking through the front door of our old home felt surreal, but I refused to let it be a shrine to the past. I hired a contractor the very next day. We ripped out every carpet Julian had walked on. We tore down the wallpaper he had chosen. I burned the leather armchair he used to sit in while lying to me about his business trips. I filled the house with bright colors, soft fabrics, and light. It was my house now. On the day we moved back in, a black town car pulled into the driveway. Marco stepped out, looking uncertain in his civilian clothes. I had tracked him down through the agency. "Mrs. Vance?" he asked, holding his hat in his hands. "You said you had a job proposition. Please, call me Elena." I smiled, opening the door wide. "And I don't need a waiter." "Marco." I need a house manager. Someone I can trust to run this estate while I focus on rebuilding my architecture firm. The salary is double what the Sterling was paying you, with full benefits." Marco's eyes filled with tears. He nodded slowly, a smile breaking through his weathered face. It would be an honor. Elena. I stood on the porch, watching Lily run across the lawn of the home that was finally, truly ours. The crushing weight of debt was gone. The fear of the eviction notice was gone. The lies were gone. For the first time in a decade, the air I breathed felt clean. I was free. 3 months later, the heavy oak doors of the county courthouse swung open, and the final chapter of my old life came to a close. Inside the courtroom, the air had been thick with the scent of floor wax and desperation. I had sat in the front row with my back straight, wearing a tailored navy suit that I had bought with my own money. Julian sat at the defense table, but the arrogant tycoon in the tuxedo was gone. In his place sat a shrunken man in a bright orange jumpsuit, his hair thinning and gray, looking 10 years older than the 36 he actually was. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for white-collar criminals who stole from their families, had delivered the verdict with the force of a hammer strike. Mr. Vance, for the counts of grand larceny, wire fraud, and tax evasion. I sentence you to 5 years in federal prison, she had declared, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. Furthermore, full restitution is granted to Mrs. Vance, encompassing 100% of the seized assets and full legal custody of the minor child. When the bailiffs moved to take him away, Julian had turned toward the gallery. He lunged slightly against his restraints, his eyes wild and watery. Wait, he had cried out, his voice cracking. Please, tell Lily I love her. I did this for us. You have to believe me. I did not look at him. I did not flinch. Instead, I turned my attention to my daughter sitting beside me. I reached out and gently straightened the red velvet bow in her hair, smoothing a stray curl behind her ear. Mommy Lily whispered, clutching her doll. Is it over? Yes, baby, I replied softly, offering her a warm smile. It is all over. We can go home now. As we walked down the courthouse steps, the winter sun was blindingly bright. A crowd had gathered at the bottom of the stairs. Among the reporters were faces I recognized from that night at the Sterling, the women who had sneered at the clumsy waitress, the men who had laughed at Julian's jokes about his burden of a wife. Now, they did not sneer. They looked at me with a mixture of fear and newfound respect. I was no longer the victim. I was the woman who had brought down an empire with a single dossier. I walked past them without a glance, ignoring the microphones thrust in my face. I had no interest in fame. I just wanted peace. David was waiting for us by the curb, leaning against his car. He had stood by me through every deposition and every terrifying moment. He opened the door for us, but before I got in, he touched my arm gently. You know, Elena, he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners, now that you are no longer my client, I was wondering if I could take you out to dinner tonight. Just dinner. No legal pads, no evidence review. I looked at him, really seeing him for the first time in years. He was kind, steady, and honest. I would love that. David, I said, feeling a genuine smile bloom on my face. But on one condition. I pick the restaurant, and I pay the bill. He laughed, a rich, warm sound. Deal. I drove my new car, a safe and reliable SUV, through the streets of Chicago on our way home. As we navigated the downtown traffic, the looming silhouette of the Sterling Hotel rose up on the skyline. It pierced the clouds, a monument to excess and secrets. I slowed down as we passed it. I looked up toward the penthouse ballroom on the top floor. My heart did not race. My hands did not sweat. I simply felt a profound sense of gratitude. I thought of Marco, safe and happy back at our home, preparing a hot meal. If he had not shoved me behind that curtain, if he had not warned me to hide, I would still be living a lie. That moment of terror had been the catalyst for my freedom. "What are you looking at?" Mommy Lily asked from the back seat. "Nothing, sweetie," I said, turning my eyes back to the road ahead. Just an old building. That evening, the living room of our reclaimed craftsman bungalow was glowing with the light of a fire. The ghost of Julian was gone, exorcised by new paint and new memories. Lily and I stood before a towering evergreen tree, much bigger than the plastic one we had in the apartment. We hung ornaments of glass and wood, laughing as we tried to place the star on top. "This is the best Christmas ever," Lily giggled, her eyes reflecting the twinkling lights. "Yes," I whispered, pulling her close and kissing the top of her head. "It really is." I looked around my warm home, bought and paid for with the truth. There were no secrets here, no traitors in the shadows, just us, and a future that belonged entirely to us. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on Elena's revenge. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.